Imagine you're trying to read an urgent email from your boss, but the letters are literally just melting off the screen.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Or, you're driving down the highway and the lane markers start breathing, like actually expanding and contracting.
And it is terrifying.
Right. And the kicker is you haven't taken a substance in weeks, maybe even months.
Wow.
But your brain is just totally trapped in the trip. You provided us with some really fascinating notes today, and this exact scenario is right at the center of them.
It really is.
We were diving into the diagnostic reality of hallucinogen use disorder, or HUD. And we're using this incredible documentation you sent us from a Georgia telehealth practice called Coping and Healing Counseling, or CHC.
Yeah, CHC.
So, okay, let's unpack this, because our mission today is to completely strip away those pop culture assumptions surrounding these substances.
Exactly.
We're going to look at the actual mechanics of what this disorder does to the brain, how it fundamentally disrupts a person's life, and how modern clinical models are attempting to dismantle the barriers to getting treatment.
It is a phenomenal stack of notes you sent over, by the way. I mean, looking through the materials you provided on CHC, we have a really compelling case study here.
We really do.
Today isn't just about reading off some boring list of symptoms from a manual, We are analyzing the mechanics of accessible behavioral health care.
Right, the real-world application.
Exactly. We're looking at how the clinical world takes a condition that is, frankly, heavily shrouded in cultural mythology and applies a highly structured, evidence-based framework to actually treat it.
Right, because before we can even look at how a practice like CHC operates, we have to isolate exactly what condition we're dealing with here.
We do.
And the sources you provided differ pretty wildly from the usual cultural stereotypes. Like, the notes specifically anchor hallucinogen use disorder as a recognized condition in the DSM-5.
The diagnostic manual, yes.
Right. And we are talking about a documented pattern of using substances like LSD, psilocybin, and PCP.
Yeah, the classic hallucinogens.
The core definition in the text is that this pattern of use continues even as the real-world costs in a person's life just begin to pile up. The notes are very explicit here. They say this is more than just experimenting.
Which is such an important distinction.
It is, but I have to admit, I read that and immediately thought about the broader cultural narrative. You look at Silicon Valley tech bros talking about microdosing for productivity.
Oh, right, the biohacking trend.
Yeah, exactly. Or you have this highly romanticized view of taking a journey of self-discovery at some music festival.
Right, it's seen as a rite of passage almost.
Yeah, the media frequently paints hallucinogens as either a harmless phase or, like you said, a biohacking tool. So where's the actual line? I mean, how does the DSM-5 separate a bad weekend from a clinical psychiatric disorder?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the clinical distinction relies entirely on the concept of friction.
Friction. How so?
Yeah. So a diagnosis of hallucinogen use disorder doesn't depend on the cultural zeitgeist, right? And it doesn't even necessarily depend on the sheer volume of this substance consumed.
Wait, really? It's not just about how much you take.
No, not exactly.
Yeah.
The DSM-5 evaluates the erosion of executive function. When we use the word experimenting, we're implying that the individual retains a functioning feedback loop.
Okay, a feedback loop.
Right. If the experiment yields negative results, say they have a terrifying experience or they miss a crucial day of work, their executive function kicks in and they just stop the behavior.
So the feedback loop is completely intact. It's like they touch the hot stove, it burns, they pull their hand away.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. But with a DSM-5 use disorder, that feedback loop is compromised.
It's broken.
Exactly. The tipping point is what your notes describe as the costs piling up. It is the continuation of using LSD, psilocybin, or PCP despite glaring, actively destructive consequences.
So they keep touching the stove even though they're getting burned.
Yes, the person might be failing out of school, or their partner might be threatening to leave, or maybe their mental health is just unraveling. Yet the compulsion to use overrides their cognitive awareness of all those consequences.
Wow. So it stops being a choice at all.
Exactly. It's a transition from a voluntary choice to a neurologically driven compulsion.
So if that choice is eroding, what does that actually look like day to day? Because we really need to look at the red flags mentioned in the text you sent us.
Right, the tangible symptoms.
Yeah. If the feedback loop is broken, how does a person, or maybe their family, recognize that they've crossed into clinical territory?
The source notes break down a few very clear signs.
They do.
They list tolerance, which is, needing more of the substance just to achieve the same altered state.
Standard for many use disorders.
Right. And they list using the substance in physically risky situations, and also the resulting strain on work, school, or relationships like you mentioned.
Right.
But there are two specific symptoms in your notes that completely stopped me in my tracks.
I suspect I know which two, but what specifically caught your eye?
The lingering visual or perceptual changes.
Yes. HPCD.
Yeah, the text notes that these can occur even when the person is completely sober. Going back to my example at the beginning, the letters melting on the screen.
Right.
How does that physically happen? I mean, I would just assume that once a chemical like psilocybin or LSD is processed out of your bloodstream, the effects just end.
It makes sense to assume that, yeah.
Right. So why is the movie still playing when the projector is supposedly turned off? Like, I just imagine walking out of a movie theater, but the movie is still playing over your vision when you're just trying to go about your day and you can't turn it off.
That is such a visceral analogy, and it's highly accurate. It happens because hallucinogens fundamentally alter how the brain's sensory gating system operates.
Sensory gating system.
Yeah. Think of your brain as having this highly sophisticated spam filter.
Okay, a spam filter.
Right. Every single second, millions of sensory data points are hitting your eyes and ears, and your brain just filters out the background noise so you can focus on reading that email or driving that car.
Right, otherwise you'd just be overwhelmed.
Exactly. Hallucinogens temporarily disable that spam filter, which allows all of that raw, chaotic sensory data to flood your conscious awareness.
Wow.
And in some cases, particularly with chronic use that leads to a disorder, the brain just struggles to reboot that filter.
So the visual cortex is basically just stuck in an open position.
In a sense, yeah, it is. The neurological pathways that process visual and spatial information, they remain hyperreactive.
Even without the drug.
Even without it. So even without the active presence of the chemical, a minor stimulus like a bright light or a weird pattern on a rug or a sudden movement, it can trigger a cascade of sensory misfires.
That sounds exhausting.
It's incredibly distressing for the patient because it shatters their baseline trust in their own reality.
Which honestly leads right into the second symptom that surprised me. The text explicitly mentions the patient experiencing strong cravings between uses.
Yes, the psychological craving.
I always thought of hallucinogens as non-addictive. Like, we culturally talk about intense physical cravings with opioids or alcohol, where the body literally goes into physical shock.
Right, the withdrawal symptoms.
Exactly. But your notes highlight cravings for PCP, LSD, and psilocybin. Can we dwell on the mechanics of that for a second? How does a craving even work if the body isn't physically dependent on the substance?
It is a really crucial distinction. We often mistakenly believe that if a drug doesn't cause violent physical withdrawal symptoms, like tremors or a dangerous spike in heart rate, then it just isn't addictive.
Right, that's definitely the myth.
But the DSM-5 recognizes that psychological dependence can be just as tyrannical as physical dependence.
Tyrannical, that's a strong word.
It fits perfectly. A psychological craving is essentially a learned survival mechanism that has just gone rogue.
Gone rogue.
Yeah. If a person repeatedly uses an altered state to escape trauma, or to numb severe anxiety, or just to cope with overwhelming stress, the brain's reward pathway rewrites its own code.
Oh, wow. So the brain starts believing the hallucination is literally the only effective coping tool available.
It creates a deeply ingrained neurological association. When that person encounters stress, their brain doesn't just casually suggest taking the substance.
Right.
It screams for it as a matter of psychological survival.
Yeah.
It is an intense, intrusive, obsessive desire to alter their consciousness.
That is wild.
So when you combine a broken sensory filter, causing those lingering visual distortions, with a brain urgently demanding the substance every time the person feels stressed,
It's a recipe for disaster.
yeah, you can see why this severely disrupts a person's ability to just function normally in society.
And it completely explains why you can't just tell someone to, sleep it off or just wait for the college phase to end. The neurochemistry is actively working against them.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the obvious next question. How does the clinical world attempt to actually fix a broken sensory filter and a rogue coping mechanism?
Right, the treatment.
Looking at the materials you provided for coping and healing counseling, they outline a very specific treatment blueprint.
They do.
They highlight 3 evidence-based approaches. There's cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. There's motivational interviewing, and contingency management.
A very solid trio.
But, and here's where it gets really interesting, they preface all of this with a core operational philosophy. They say, no lectures, no judgment.
Yes.
I just find that phrasing so fascinating. Out of all the clinical jargon they could possibly use on their documentation, they put no lectures right up front.
They lead with that because they are trying to dismantle the single largest psychological barrier to entry, which is shame.
Shame. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
When an individual is dealing with a highly stigmatized issue, especially one involving heavily criminalized substances like PCP or LSD, they fully expect to be punished by the medical establishment.
Right. They expect a wagging finger.
Exactly. They expect a clinician to look down on them. So if your notes highlight no lectures, no judgment, it indicates a very strategic move to disarm the patient's defensive posture before the clinical work even begins.
But once those defenses are finally down, what is the actual clinical work? Like, let's look at this trio of treatments. Most people have heard of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, right?
Sure, it's very common.
But it's often vaguely described in pop culture as just talking about your problems. How does it actually address those intense cravings we just talked about?
Well, CBT is much more mechanical than just venting to a therapist on a couch.
Okay.
It's really about identifying the specific measurable triggers that initiate the craving sequence.
The triggers.
Remember that rogue coping mechanism we discussed?
Mm-hmm.
CBT helps the patient map out their internal domino effect.
Like finding the first domino.
Yes. For example, the patient learns to recognize, okay, when I feel criticized at work, my anxiety spikes, and within 10 minutes, my brain initiates a severe craving for psilocybin.
So they see the pattern.
Exactly. Once they identify that invisible trigger, CBT provides active cognitive tools to interrupt the sequence before the final domino falls. It's really about rewiring that faulty alarm system.
That makes so much sense for the mechanics of the craving, but the notes also highlight motivational interviewing. And I've always struggled to understand what that actually means in practice.
It can sound a bit vague, yeah.
Isn't all therapy supposed to motivate you? Why is this a specific technique?
Because direct persuasion usually backfires. Human beings have this natural psychological reactance.
Like we're stubborn.
Pretty much. If I tell you that you absolutely must stop doing something, your instinct is to immediately argue why you shouldn't have to.
Right. Nobody likes being told what to do.
Exactly. So motivational interviewing essentially uses verbal judo.
Verbal judo. I like that.
Yeah. Instead of pushing against the patient's resistance, the clinician uses highly targeted Socratic questioning to guide the patient into basically arguing for their own recovery.
Wait, how does that work?
Well, the therapist doesn't say, your hallucinogen use is destroying your marriage.
Because that would just make them defensive.
Right. Instead, the therapist asks, how does your weekend substance use align with your goal of being a present partner?
Oh, wow.
See? It forces the patient to articulate the discrepancy between their own actions and their own values.
Oh, I see. The motivation has to be internally generated or it just won't stick.
Precisely.
But then we have the third tool listed here, contingency management. And I'll be honest, when I read your notes on this, it sounded a little bit controversial.
It often is misunderstood, yeah.
Isn't contingency management basically just offering tangible rewards like vouchers or prizes for clean drug screens? Isn't that just paying someone to not do drugs?
It is so easy to view it cynically as bribery, I know. But from a neurobiological standpoint, it is a highly effective bridge.
A bridge?
Yeah. We talked earlier about how the brain's reward pathway has been hijacked by the massive dopamine spikes caused by the substance.
Right, the rewritten code.
Well, when a person first stops using, their brain is utterly starved for dopamine.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, normal everyday activities just feel flat and meaningless. Contingency management provides immediate, tangible, positive reinforcement.
It gives them a hit of dopamine.
Exactly. It gives the starved brain a small, measurable hit of dopamine for making a healthy choice. It acts as a neurochemical scaffolding, basically holding the patient's motivation together during those really vulnerable early stages of recovery while the brain's natural reward system slowly heals itself.
That is brilliant. So you have CBT to rewire the triggers, motivational interviewing to build the internal drive, and then contingency management to chemically bridge the gap while the brain physically heals.
Exactly. It's a very comprehensive toolkit.
It really is.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this complexity is exactly why your notes emphasize that only a licensed clinician can officially make this diagnosis.
Right, you can't just take a quiz online.
No, the diagnostic landscape for behavioral health is incredibly murky. A patient might come in with lingering visuals and intense anxiety. Is it hallucinogen use disorder? Or is it underlying PTSD that they are self-medicating?
Or something else entirely.
Right. Or is it a latent schizophrenic disorder triggered by the substance? A licensed clinician is trained to perform that differential diagnosis. You cannot self-diagnose this through a web search because applying the wrong treatment to a fragile neurochemical state can be actively harmful.
That is such an important point. But let's connect the dots between the symptoms in your notes and the actual delivery method of this practice.
The telehealth aspect.
Right. Because having a comprehensive toolkit is completely useless if the patient cannot physically access the toolbox.
Very true.
The notes you shared detail the specific operational structure of coping and healing counseling, and it looks like a direct response to the geographical hurdles of healthcare. According to their documentation, CHC operates as a 100% telehealth, APA-compliant practice serving all 159 counties in the state of Georgia.
That is a massive logistical footprint.
It really is. I mean, it's like the geographical walls have just come down. Someone in a rural Georgia county now has the exact same access to care as someone sitting in the middle of downtown Atlanta.
And they eliminate the anxiety of the waiting room, too.
Yes, exactly. The data points you highlighted show they utilize a team of 15-plus licensed therapists. They list LCSWs, which are licensed clinical social workers,
Right.
LPCs, or licensed professional counselors,
Yeah.
and LMFTs, licensed marriage and family therapists.
A very well-rounded team.
Definitely. And the documentation also emphasizes that this team is diverse and culturally competent, and their scope isn't even limited to just substance use. They serve teens starting at age 13, adults, couples, and families.
Right. Has a very broad demographic.
Yeah, addressing a whole spectrum of issues, including anxiety, depression, trauma and PTSD, grief, relationships, and stress.
Well, when we analyze their model, the decision to be a 100% telehealth is particularly relevant to the symptoms we discussed earlier.
Oh, how so?
Think back to the lingering visual distortions.
The melting letters and breathing roads.
Exactly. If a patient is experiencing perceptual changes that make driving actively dangerous, requiring them to commute 45 minutes to a physical clinic is a massive barrier to entry.
That makes total sense. They literally might not be able to drive safely.
Right. By utilizing secure video, they completely bypass that logistical friction. But, the detail in your notes regarding a diverse and culturally competent team of 15-plus therapists is arguably just as critical as the technology.
I really wanted to ask about that. Why is diversity and cultural competence specifically highlighted in a clinical context like this? Does a clinician's cultural background change how they apply the DSM-5 criteria?
Well, it doesn't change the clinical criteria, but it radically changes the therapeutic alliance.
The alliance between the therapist and the patient.
Exactly. Therapy relies entirely on trust and communication. If a patient feels fundamentally misunderstood by their clinician, if they have to spend half their 50-minute session just explaining the basic nuances of their cultural background or their family dynamics or systemic stressors,
then they aren't doing the actual work of CBT.
Exactly. They're wasting time. Cultural competence provides a shorthand. It allows the therapist to contextualize the patient's substance use within their actual lived reality.
So they can hit the ground running.
Yes, having a large, diverse team means the practice can match a patient with a clinician who intuitively grasps their background, which significantly accelerates the effectiveness of the treatment.
Okay, so they've removed the logistical barrier of the commute, and they are attempting to remove the interpersonal barrier of cultural disconnect.
Right.
But looking at your sources, we have to analyze the final and honestly often most insurmountable barrier in the American healthcare system.
The financial friction.
The financial friction, exactly. You can have the most culturally competent therapist available on a secure video feed, but if the patient's credit card declines, the treatment just stops.
Sadly, yes.
The numbers provided in the materials regarding their business model are very specific. For Medicaid patients, they list a $0 copay.
$0.
Yes, zero. And for commercial plans, they specifically outline Aetna, Cigna, BCBS, UHC, and Humana. The notes state that sessions range from just $10 to $40.
That's incredibly accessible.
It really is. And just to put it out there, they list their contact avenues as 404-832-0102, their website as cheesetherapy.com, and their email as support@cheesetherapy.com. But I want to focus on that $0 copay for Medicaid.
Yeah, let's look at that.
What is the real-world impact of that? Because financial relief has to be, in itself, a form of stress stress relief for someone already dealing with the costs of a disorder piling up.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Analyzing those pricing structures, particularly the $0 copay for Medicaid, reveals a very deliberate behavioral economics strategy.
Behavioral economic strategy. How so?
We established earlier that psychological cravings are heavily triggered by stress, right?
Right, the rogue coping mechanism.
Well, for the demographic relying on Medicaid, systemic financial stress is often a chronic, daily reality. The anxiety of housing insecurity, food costs, or mounting bills, it acts as a constant accelerant for the compulsion to use substances as an escape.
Oh, wow.
If a behavioral health practice introduces a high out-of-pocket cost, they aren't just creating a financial barrier, they are actively introducing a new psychological stressor that could trigger the very cravings they are trying to treat.
I hadn't thought of it that way. The literal cost of the therapy could trigger the urge to relapse.
Exactly. The brain, which is heavily influenced by the disorder, is always looking for an excuse to avoid the hard work of recovery.
It wants the easy dopamine hit.
Right. It will weaponize the cost of a session to convince the patient to abandon treatment entirely.
That is so insidious.
It really is.
Yeah.
But by engineering a model that utilizes telehealth to lower overhead and accepting Medicaid to drop the point-of-care cost to $0, the practice basically neutralizes the brain's most effective excuse.
They take away the weapon.
Precisely. It combines the clinical tools like CBT and motivational interviewing with an economic safety net, catching individuals who would almost certainly be priced out of a traditional out-of-network brick-and-mortar system.
That's just an incredibly holistic approach. So what does this all mean? Synthesizing everything from the sources you provided us today, we are looking at a profound reframing of how hallucinogen use disorder is managed.
A total paradigm shift, really.
Yeah. We've established that HUD is a complex neurobiological condition defined by the DSM-5. It is marked by severe friction in a person's life, driven by tolerance, risky use, lingering sensory gating failures, and intense, stress-induced psychological cravings.
Right. It's not a joke.
No, it is light years beyond the cultural myth of harmless experimentation. But the materials you sent regarding coping and healing counseling in Georgia show how modern care models are actually evolving to meet that complexity.
They are.
By combining evidence-based clinical tools with a statewide telehealth infrastructure and aggressively accessible pricing, the systemic barriers to treatment are just being methodically dismantled.
Which, leaves us with a rather profound philosophical question to consider as we wrap up today.
Oh, okay. Let's hear it.
We've spent this entire deep dive looking at the clinical definitions of hallucinogen use and the mechanics of treating it. But society is currently undergoing a massive shift in how it views these specific substances.
Very true.
We are seeing psilocybin and LSD increasingly commercialized, rebranded as wellness trends, productivity hacks, and even mainstream therapeutic tools in some states.
Right, the microdosing craze.
Exactly. So if society continues to blur the line between clinical substance abuse and optimized wellness, how will our medical definitions of disorder and addiction have to adapt in the next decade?
Wow.
Yeah, when the culture normalizes the substance, the clinical world faces an entirely new challenge in just identifying the harm in the first place.
That is a brilliant angle, and something that definitely wasn't covered in the initial text. How do we even treat a disorder when society starts selling the cause as a cure?
It's a complicated future.
It is a heavy question to mull over. Thank you so much for sending these notes our way and giving us the opportunity to really analyze them with you. Keep questioning those cultural narratives, keep your feedback loop intact, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.